Absolutely, there are tremendous amounts of evidence on the side of God. If we probe the observable universe, we will see signposts pointing to the transcendent.
We've got the evidence of a lazy mind, I'm afraid, not a thoughtful mind. The whole point about science is to work back to understanding how things took place. But look how far we've come in the past 100 years compared with how far religion has come in the past 3,000 years. It hasn't moved 1 inch towards understanding.
I would say that this is a typical tactic from someone who I would consider a militant atheist. This is not a debate between religion and science. No, it's not.
There is nothing that the scientific method cannot be applied to and fail to elucidate. There is no God, no God, no God.
I mean, I'm not going to take all this on my shoulder.
I will begin tonight by saying Assalamu alaikum, which is the Arabic for peace be unto you. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, in humanity, dear colleagues, friends and associates, it is a pleasure to have you all here tonight at this wonderful event, the Science Leads to Atheism. I believe this is a very important topic in our everyday lives, which people have debated over and pondered about for many, many years. This topic is more than just a matter of personal faith or belief. It is a vast issue which has had an impact on some major spheres of life, such as politics and education. I am delighted to welcome, on the behalf of the University of Surrey and the University of Surrey Islamic Society, Peter Atkins and Adam Deen. Please give a round of applause to both speakers. They have travelled all the way to our university to share their views on this topic from an academic perspective to our students and visitors. Does science lead to atheism? This event promotes the understanding of different ways of life. In such a multicultural society and university, it is vital that we take the time to learn about people's views and understand them. Peter Atkins is a well-known atheist and supporter of Richard Dawkins' ideas. He has written and spoken on issues of humanism, atheism, and what he sees as the incompatibility between science and religion. According to Atkins, whereas religion scorns the power of human comprehension, science respects it. Peter Atkins was an Oxford professor of chemistry and fellow of Lincoln College until his retirement in 2007. Adam Deen is an international speaker on Muslim apologetics, a former Islam Channel presenter and Muslim philosopher who has been working in the field of Muslim apologetics for almost a decade. He has contributed to debates on issues ranging from religious philosophy and theology. His work draws on contemporary philosophy to defend Islam in debates. He has appeared on mainstream TV and debated USA's leading atheist Dan Barker, researcher for EMRC, European Muslim Research Centre. Thank you very much. We'll now have Brother Ali, who's going to recite a few verses of the Qur'an.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أولم يرى الذين كفروا أن السماوات والأرض كانتا رتقا ففتقناهما وجعلنا من الماء شيء حي أفلا يؤمنون وجعلنا في الأرض رواسي أن تميد بهم وجعلنا فيها فجاجا سبلا لعلهم يهتدون وجعلنا السماء سقفا محفوظا وهم عن آياتها معرضون وهو الذي خلق الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر كل في فلك يسبحون وما جعلنا لبشر من قبلك الخلد أفإن مت فهم الخالدون.
We will now begin the debate with Peter Atkins. I've asked the audience to remain silent, please. If anybody doesn't feel as though they need to speak, could you please leave the lecture theatre? I hope I don't have to escort anybody out tonight. This is not an emotional debate, it's a debate from an academic perspective. Without further much ado, I'll press the start button as soon as Peter Atkins begins talking this evening. Thank you very much. We give a warm welcome to Peter Atkins.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening and to give you some of my views. I hope you realise that I intend to attack all religion, not just Islam. So although there might be, at the end of my speech, a few hundred enemies in the room, I'm quite happy to realise that there are several billion enemies outside this room. So I'm sure you will accept that aspect of toleration. I see I've been given 25 hours to speak. That's not fair. Okay, good. That's better. In my view, religion has contributed considerably to the emergence of modern culture and to the modern world view, and I don't wish to denigrate its historical importance. The emergence of religious attitudes reflected mankind's quest for knowledge. Early man, and presumably early woman, was perplexed by the events that took place around them and sought to understand them. They ascribed the forces of nature to gods of a variety of flavours. And as scholarship, erudition, and in particular politics progressed, those individual gods were rolled up into a single, all-powerful, multinational corporate god. The notion of an omnipotent God to whom all creation could be ascribed stimulated early scientists to study their surroundings in order better to understand his nature. Early scientists studied the heavens for clues to God's intentions and character. And although we now know that their views about the impact of the stars on human activities were utterly baseless, they nevertheless opened the doorway to true knowledge about astronomy. By the Pythagoreans, with their fanciful views about the role of integers and fractions in the harmonious heavens, nevertheless established important information about numbers. Later, chemists and physicists were inspired by their faith in God to try to read his book. And even Newton thought that he was sniffing out God's plan for the world as he established his mechanics. Now, it's undeniable that the conviction that there is a God has inspired humans to try to discover the workings of his world. Almost by accident, though, in the process of that search, mankind stumbled into a form of discovery that has proved to be extraordinarily powerful. I speak, of course, of the scientific method. The method is essentially to go out into the world, make careful observations, and compare notes. The scientific method is in complete and irreconcilable contrast to religious sources of knowledge. Those boil down to accepting the ancient texts and regarding written authority and sentiment as a more reliable guide than experiment. Religion is all about the unquestioning acceptance of texts written many hundreds of years ago by well-meaning but underinformed peasants and scholars. Science is all about ceaselessly probing authority and accumulating reliable knowledge by careful observation and public discourse. Religion is easy because it answers all profound questions by assertion. Science is difficult because true knowledge is hard to uncover. Religion scorns, as you heard in the introduction, the power of human understanding by asserting the unknowability of the mind of God. Science respects humanity by acknowledging the power of the human mind, particularly when it is collaborating with others. Now, we're asked this evening to decide whether the undeniable success of the scientific method in its ability to expose the workings of the world takes us in the direction of atheism. I need to distinguish two kinds of atheism. Weak atheism simply accepts that as there is no evidence for the existence of God, then there is no reason to accept his existence. Strong atheism asserts more aggressively that there is no God. I shall invite you this evening to accept the position just of weak atheism and accept that there is no evidence in favour of belief in God. In order to align this position with the topic of tonight's debate, I shall argue that if science can eliminate the evidence that has been proposed in favour of the existence of God, then you are led ineluctably towards atheism. I hope you accept that most civilizations make progress in their understanding of the world. I also hope that you will accept that although religion has made a constructive contribution to understanding, and indeed to art, by inspiration, there comes a point where it is appropriate to consider whether you can set aside that scaffolding, the scaffolding that religion represents, and accept a more modern world view. This leaves aside, of course, the question of personal deportment. If you want to believe in the concept of God in order to maintain an appropriate mode of behaviour and attitude to your fellow man, then that's up to you. You're quite welcome to believe in some symbolic guiding principle, but what you perhaps passionately and indeed devoutly believe in does not need to exist for it to be a great inspiration and aspiration. I have another preliminary remark. In any discussion relating to the workings of the world, it's important to adopt the simplest explanation, unless evidence demands its elaboration. For the sake of the discussion, I'm inviting you to set aside the prejudices, if any, including what may be devoutly held belief in faith, and join me in initially supposing that there is no God. Then I invite you to accept his existence only if evidence can be found. Finally, I have a third and very important preliminary remark. To succeed in this argument, I don't need to demonstrate that science has already answered all the great questions of being. All I need to do, for the sake of this debate, which is to argue that science leads to atheism, is to demonstrate that if it could answer any one of those great questions, then belief in God is weakened. Moreover, all I need to do is to show that if science is potentially capable of resolving and elucidating all the great questions of being, then it can eliminate all the purported evidence for the existence of God. In that case, we shall be right in adhering to what I call weak atheism. Note that I don't have to demonstrate that science has already answered the great questions. All I have to do is to argue that if in due course it answers them, then atheism is the appropriate stance. Now, I shall, however, not simply make assertions about science, because that would bring me the accusation that I was behaving like someone religious. I need to argue in support of my views by demonstrating that science has these great questions in its sights and is making progress with them, and indeed, in some cases, has already solved them. So what sort of evidence is presented by believers, and what are the arguments against it? I should be able, as time is limited this evening, we could go on for those full 25 hours, with just 4 assertions that fall within the competence of science to elucidate. In each case, I shall argue that science can resolve the issue, and thus in each case you are taking a step towards having to accept the position of weak atheism. Okay, first assertion, which I think will take you on the first step. What sort of the world needed to be created, so therefore a creator, God, exists. Here you have a choice. You might say that your holy books assert that God made the universe. There is no point in asking how or why he did so. And accept that it is wholly outside human capabilities to comprehend how he did it and how he could conjure something from nothing. That, in my view, is an attitude stuck in the past. Alternatively, you can respect the power of human intellect when working collectively to dig into the heart, into the past, and look for clues about how it could come into existence, and do so without divine intervention. That, in my view, is a modern view. So, to reiterate my position in this context, if you can accept that science is capable of elucidating the creation without divine intervention, then even though it has not yet done so, you are led a step towards accepting that science leads to atheism. But is there any prospect of science succeeding in this elucidation? It's conceivable that science will come up with isn't conceivable that science will come up with a mathematically precise, mechanistic account of what went on that first day. Now, you can't deny that scientists are edging their way back to what might be a beginning, and have already pushed back the front of ignorance to within tiny fractions of seconds of the beginning. You can't deny that science has made extraordinary progress in the past 300 years, and especially in the past 100 years. Religion, I suppose yours in particular, but not only yours, is stuck in the past. It seems to me that there is... Okay. I might give my volume a minute to try that. It seems to me that there is no validity except pessimism in the view that that science will not be able to complete its story. Scientists are in fact beginning to struggle with the notion of creation ex nihilo and are speculating on ways to account for the emergence of something from nothing. 100 years ago, it would have been unthinkable that science could make pronouncements about an entire universe. Today, that is commonplace. If scientists can account for the emergence of the universe from absolutely nothing without intervention, then it will no longer be possible to argue that God exists on the basis that a creator is necessary. It's also commonly argued that there needed to be a first cause, and hence a God to act as a first causer. That, I'm afraid, is illogical. Although events in this universe are all caused, there is no reason to suppose that the coming into existence of a causal universe, the initial event establishing causality, was caused. The initial uncaused inception of the universe is indeed a deep and worrying question, but it should not be rendered more so by imposing it from current human experience. Secondly, the values of the fundamental constants must have been selected by a benign creator. Once again, all I need to point out is that if science can account for the values of the fundamental constants, then this evidence fails. And once again, you really do have to accept that science leads to atheism. The only argument against it is to assert that science is incapable of accounting for the fundamental constants. But what is the evidence for that? It would be your pessimism and reluctance to accept that science has the power to deal with such a question. Now, you really should respect the power of the collective human intellect and take pride from its ability to make progress, not be frightened of the progress that it represents. But to bolster my argument in this context, I need to sketch various scenarios that science might consider. We shall be able to choose between them only when a mathematical theory of cosmogenesis has been formulated, but I think it only reasonable to mention one or two speculations. I make 4 suggestions about how science might answer the question of the fundamental constants. First, one argument about the fact that the fundamental values seem to be fine-tuned is the view that life is something special. That maybe life is just one more property of the universe, and there is no logical reason for putting it on a pedestal any more than any other property, such as the smell of ammonia. Second, it's conceivable that a universe can come into stable existence only with one particular mix of fundamental constants for reasons that we currently don't understand, and that just by chance that mix results in life. Thirdly, it could be that there are trillions and trillions of randomly constituted, undesigned universes, even an infinite number of them, in which case it's not improbable that our own particular mix has come into existence. Fourthly, there is an argument that because scientists have reviewed the consequences of changing individual fundamental constants and not whole collections of them simultaneously, then there might in fact be other mixtures of values that also give rise to some kind of life, not necessarily our kind. No one knows what is the right answer, if any, of those that I sketch. But I remind you that all I'm asking is for you to accept that if science can resolve this problem, then it eliminates the concept of a designer God, and you're once again led another step towards atheism. Thirdly, the biosphere must have been prompted into existence. Holy books commonly inspire belief in God by ascribing to him the existence of this teeming biosphere. There was naturally much perplexity among ancient peoples about how such a varied environment could emerge, and the easy solution was simply to assert that God made it. Now, of course, in this instance, science has come up with an explanation that needs no God. In the 18th and 19th century, the fossil record began to show without doubt that evolution has occurred. Then, just 150 years ago, Charles Darwin hit upon the concept of natural selection as the mechanism of that evolution. There can be no doubt that the broad features of the theory are correct, but not only is it consistent with the fossil record, but it has predictive power that has been confirmed, for instance, by 20th century advances in molecular biology. Some believers, of course, assert that God devised evolution as a promising route to man, but I'm afraid there is no evidence for that. Now, the remaining question, of course, I accept that the evolution by natural selection is a half a step towards accepting that there is no evidence for an organic design of God. But there is another question, which is the step from the inorganic to the organic. How did life begin? The religious asserts that divine breath converted dust into atoms. Here lies another if. If science can account for the initial emergence of life, then the concept of a life-breathing God is eliminated, and you've been read the other half step towards atheism. As elsewhere, this proposition would be empty and more akin to religious assertion if there were not plausible arguments that science can achieve this explanation. In this case, like the much harder problem of the origin of the universe, scientists have indeed not cracked the final nut, but are far from being empty of original ideas. There are many possible scenarios, once again. The underlying difficulty is that we don't yet know where and when the initial step into the organic was taken. Was it on Earth, in space, under the influence of sunlight, or near a hot vent? And what was the nature and composition of the environment when that first step occurred? Indeed, what was that first step that led to prebiotic molecules and then to living entities? These are all real questions, and scientists are grappling with them. They do not rush in and assert authoritatively a solution. They beaver away, collecting evidence and running experiments in their laboratories. Fourthly, that the universe is an orderly place implies the existence of God, the Lord giver. That the universe is an orderly place in some sense, that there appears to be natural laws and causal behaviour, is held by many to be evidence for the supreme giver of laws. The scientific endeavour, it is then held by the religious, is the challenge to discover these laws, marvelling at their wisdom and subtlety, and thus coming closer to the mind of God, and thereby further confirming his existence. I believe that science can elucidate the emergence of natural laws. First, I need to establish the nature of the scientific law. The scientific law is a summary of observations on the behaviour of entities. For instance, a law might be that light travels in straight lines. Now, I will now contend that a law is a consequence of the intrinsic nature of the entity. It is not something that needs to be imposed by an external agent. Thus, the intrinsic nature of light is a wave of electromagnetic radiation. I don't have time to go through the full argument, but basically it is that if you allow light to travel in every conceivable direction, then because of the mutual interference between neighbouring paths, all those waves cancel, except the ones close to a straight line. So we infer that light travels in straight lines, but it is anarchy, just anarchy, that leads to regulation. Perhaps that is moral of our own time. Now, in my closing 2.5 minutes, let me summarise, I've taken you 4 steps towards atheism. I reiterate that according to this evening's motion, which is that science really leads to atheism, all I have to do is to show that if arguments that purport to be evidence for the existence of God can be displaced by science, then your belief in his existence is undermined, and hence you are led in the direction of at least weak atheism. I'm not concerned with God as a role model or team mascot. Now, we are not arguing this evening with belief in what I regard as a delusion, not arguing that that belief in a delusion is socially and personally admirable. Now, in each case, I have demonstrated that science's potential ability to displace a medieval and perhaps more ancient view about deep questions is plausible, although not in every case yet achieved, but not outside the grasp of science. I have shown that science is able, in principle, to eliminate the Creator God, the benevolent God, the organic originator God, and the lawgiver God. In no case does science lead you towards a confirmation of the existence of God. In each case, the journey is towards atheism. And so, being fearful of what science reveals, you should take pride in being members of a human race that is capable of elucidating its surroundings in a publicly accessible manner. You should take joy from deeper understanding than assertive authority provides. And you should not be fearful of migrating from ancient beliefs towards secure